Okay, lovely. So today I'm joined by Jason Harwin, and I'm delighted to welcome Jason to the board of Stamp Out Spiking. So Jason is recently retired from Lincolnshire Police. He was ranked as a Deputy Chief Constable, and he's also served in 4 other police forces and worked within the National Police Chiefs Council as the lead on drugs for 5 years. Jason was also the National Police Lead for Operation Leicester, which was the national response to needle spiking in October 2021. And in addition, Jason is also a member of the expert reference group for the London Drug Commission and associate of the College of Policing. He was also awarded the King's Police Medal in last year's New Year's Honours List for services to policing. So quite an introduction for you there, Jason Harwin.
So firstly, Dawn, thank you very much for that lengthy introduction. And bear in mind, that took 30 years to do all that. So that actually, there's quite a lot of that in a very long time period. So I'm very grateful. I think firstly, it's a great opportunity to put something back into local communities and the work that you're doing to, again, not just make sure the learning experience I've had over the last 30 years hopefully continues to add some value, but importantly, we do everything we can to stop people being a victim of spiking in the first place. I think certainly in my time in policing, we have let victims down on many occasions. We have provided some really good support at times for victims as well, and again, we've got to get some consistency. I think the issue for me around spiking is one that's gone significantly underreported for many, many years. It's one that affects every town and city throughout the UK and outside the UK, if I'm very honest. And the reality is this is affecting our sons, daughters, grandchildren, not just now, but in the future as well. So hopefully what I bring to the board is firstly, hopefully some experience, hopefully some opportunity to support the group of all the good work that's been done. There's some massive good work being done already, and get that wider sharing across the UK. But just importantly, put some challenge into all of us to say, look, what more do we need to do? Can we do? And again, put some pressures on all of the strategic partners to make sure they're playing their part to stamp out spiking as well. So I really am grateful for the opportunity and the invite to come and join you. The important bit is there's lots of work to do here. There's lots of work already been done, but there's lots more to do, and I want to be part of that, helping you to do that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Jason. Well, you know how excited I was to get you on the board. I was absolutely buzzing. So yeah, and I think that between us, you know, sometimes I just feel personally that, am I doing everything right? You know, is there anything that I'm missing out on? And I think some of the discussions that we've had already for me is that just having that confirmation that, yes, that's the right way. And because we're so deep in the middle of it, for us, it's going to be great to have somebody who's on the outside looking in and saying, oh, look, you've missed this, you've missed that. And some of those key points, like we were talking about earlier, about the festival seasons, trying to reach out to those people who've got the corporate social responsibility that want to be seen to be helping. And I think that's something that's key.
Yeah, Dawn, I fully agree. I think that's the key bit is that it can't rely on this really important agenda area where victims of spiking get an inconsistent response depending where they live in the UK. That can't be right, can it? Likewise, actually collectively, we know we can make a bigger difference. Again, ideally raising the awareness of spiking, and again, what people can do to stop being spiked in the first place. And that's about social responsibility of licensees, all the issues around behaviour change of individuals that believe spiking may be a bit of fun, which clearly it's not. It affects people's lives, all the way through to actually, if someone is a victim, making sure they get the relevant support quickly, which then gives obviously the law enforcement service the best opportunity to catch those responsible for it as well.
Yeah. And that is so key for the amounts of victims that I've spoken to over all these years. And it just keeps coming back to that lack of education, the not adequate training, and not having the correct resources in place at the time of the offence. And some really key issues there that can be really quickly introduced to be able to safeguard. Just getting those samples in time is a perfect.
It is, and again, it's the important bit is it's about having the eyes and ears in all our communities to look out for individuals that may be committing these offences, because the reality is they're being committed by somebody, so someone must see something. But then, like you say, it's also about making sure that if someone is a victim, they know what they need to do to help get the necessary support quickly, or those that supporting that individual, whether it be friends, whether it be family, whether it be security industry that's supporting that particular venue, all the way through to if it's occurring in universities or anywhere it's occurring, that actually they know what the response needs to be. And the reality is, by getting that response in quickly, not just to make sure that that victim's no longer vulnerable and therefore supported and hopefully can go on to continue to live a full life, but the reality also is making sure that we get good evidence for the police service to make sure we can catch those people, because it will be a minority that's committing this offence. It will be. We know that. The reality is we need to catch them, because if you can catch them, if no one's committing that offence because they've been caught, there won't be more victims again in the future as well.
Perfect. And I think that is the heart of what we're doing at Stamp Out Spiking, is trying to share that message, make sure that all the key service providers are all trained and adequately resourced, like we say, to be able to deal with this crime. And simple little things like, you know, I feel sorry for the police, to be honest with you. I mean, how can you help someone that comes into the police station and says to you, oh, you know, I know that someone's had sex with me last night, but I don't know where I was. I don't know who done it to me. I don't know, you know, that they're not giving you much to work with. So that's something that,
yeah, it is. And it's complex. The policing is complex, Dawn. The reality is we deal with lots of different scenarios, different cases. That part of the police role is to investigate those offences that's taken place, that where believe people have been committed, have been victim of a crime. And importantly, that's what is down to the police. The important bit is we need that person to have the confidence and trust to walk through that door of a police station to say, I believe this has happened to me. I'm like, even if they're not certain to believe, because reality is that at least it can set the relevant investigation strands in to get going, and therefore making sure again we are trying to identify those that are responsible, because as I said, it only needs the right person to report it at the right time. Actually, the chances of catching that person increases significantly. And the first bit is again recognizing the courage required of the individual victim or victims, family and friends to come forward, because that's not easy. The fact is, let's be honest, a lot of people don't report it because, and they shouldn't feel, but they do. They feel embarrassed. The fact is, something may have happened and they feel they've had responsibility to do something about it in the first place. Well, I don't want people to feel like that. I want people to feel, if they feel they've been a victim of crime, they have got confidence to come into the police service, contact the police service or the victim care, because it doesn't have to be necessarily through the police, but then making sure that we can do everything we can to support them.
And that's a really good point there, actually, is that victim support, you can still go there independently. You can still go to the SARC, the sexual assault referral centres. They can, you know, they'll invite you in. They'll take all of the evidence that they need, and you don't have to make a decision there and then, do you?
No, you don't. And that's the point, isn't it? Recognizing that it affects people differently, doesn't it? As a victim. And again, I've not been a victim of spiking, but I have spoke to victims that have been spiked. And the reality is they're all very different. The reality is, though, we've got to make sure that there is all the support that those individuals do need, whether it be now or in the future. But just importantly, if they are a victim, that no matter where they live in the UK, that they actually get a consistent response. And as fronts that firstly make sure there's some empathy, some compassion from the officers dealing with it. Secondly, making sure we are securing the best evidence, again, getting samples, hopefully with the victim support. But secondly, then is the investigation is taken seriously and the time's committed to that investigation to do everything we can to catch the person responsible, and ideally making sure we don't have future victims in the future as well.
Yeah. So just on that point, Jason, what would you be saying if anyone who's listening today, what would you be saying to them if they were a victim of this crime and they felt ashamed and embarrassed? What words can you say to them that would give them the confidence to come forward?
So firstly, that I can't stop them feeling how they're feeling. I can't. What I can say is, though, it is really, really important that we need to identify that person or persons that's committed that horrific crime against them. And importantly, to do that, we do need them to have some courage, whether that be again through third-party reporting or through the police service itself to report what's happened. The second part is we do want to get best evidence, and that best evidence is trying to get a sample. That could be a urine sample, it can be blood. But the reality, we need to get that quickly, because the sooner we get it, the more chance we've got identifying what may have been used to spike that individual. And therefore, by reporting it, whether through third party or through the police service, by securing a urine sample, ideally, or if need be, by the other samples, we then can start an investigation. And I know some may feel they're embarrassed because they may feel themselves they've either had a little bit too much to drink themselves, they may have been taking some illicit drugs. Well, that still doesn't mean you should be a victim of spiking. It doesn't. So, and the police service is not here to look at what you may have been doing yourself previously, excepting again, we don't want people to commit crime. But the reality is, just because you may have been taking some illicit drugs yourself, doesn't mean you can't be a victim of spiking. And the important bit is here is clear policy and guidance with the Crown Prosecution Service that actually, even if you have been taking illicit drugs when you know you shouldn't because it's illegal, the fact is you're still a victim of spiking, and therefore we need to investigate it and we need to bring those persons responsible before courts where we can.
That is such a good point that you've just raised, and it's such a grey area. I know that after speaking to students who have been recreational drug users, and they've said to me, how can I then go and report it to my university? They're worried that they'll be removed and, you know, that will scupper for the rest of their lives. And I sometimes wonder if that's part of this whole spiking regime that's happening, is that people know that, how, you know, if they're, we've had students who've reported to us that they've been spiked and there were only other students at this event. So it had to be somebody in-house that's actually drugged them. And so, you know, when they're worried about things like that, we've reached out to universities. We've tried to ask them what would be the procedure. You know, could you speak to the students? Could you put out some sort of documentation to say that they would be kept safe if they wanted to disclose this crime? And that's another difficult area as well, to be honest with you, because of this grey area, I think that people are taking more advantage of others because they know that it's going to be really difficult for them to step forward.
Yeah, so prior to me finishing in policing last year, and obviously like you mentioned earlier on, Dawn, Operation Leicester, we put some guidance and some policy decisions to all forces around the issues. If somebody reports they've been a victim of spiking, and clearly in their sample there is illicit drugs there that the individual may have been taking themselves, so it's not one's necessarily used for spiking, but they may have been taking themselves, the police service is not here to then investigate what the individual has been doing themselves. It's not. We're not here. We're not, if I'm very honest, we're not interested that they may have been taking illicit drugs. Yes, they shouldn't do, and we need to do the education piece. But we're more interested in what actually has been used to spike that individual and therefore committed potentially other offences you touched on there. Unfortunately, we see far too many individuals that are then going to be sexually assaulted, robbed of personal items, etc. We are more interested in identifying the person that's been responsible for that crime, the spiking crime. So if you have been taking illicit drugs, that doesn't stop you being a victim, and it doesn't stop you reporting to the police. And you can report in the police that it's not the police interest to prosecute you for taking drugs previously. It's more of interest to the police service to deal with those that spiked you and therefore committed not just that horrific crime, but also committed potentially other crimes, and will go on to commit other crimes against other people in the future if we don't catch them.
Yeah, definitely. And now the other grey area, which we would just sort of hit upon there, is getting these samples in time. Now, this is something that drives me absolutely insane, I've got to say, like I say again, from all the victims that I've spoken to. So we had one particular lady in Exeter, my home city, who was a nurse. She went out with her sister, who was a nurse. She unfortunately got spiked. She was going in and out of consciousness. She got taken to the hospital. They phoned the police. I've got to say first, the venue phoned the police. They couldn't get there for a certain amount of time. So she was taken to the hospital. And when they were at the hospital, one of the sisters said, please, can you take a sample? And they said, no, I'm sorry. We can't take a sample without a policeman being present to take that sample. Now, this has been said to me on time and time and time again. And how is there a way that this grey area of capturing those all important samples could be looked at? Is this something that needs to be, you know, who needs to be on round the table to discuss?
Yeah, so Dawn, firstly, in terms of getting samples and accepting you get samples in different environments, so you could get a sample at home, or it could be a sample in hospital, or it could be a GPs and everything else around it. So the first part is, if someone is required to go to hospital and they believe they've been spiked, quite rightly, the hospital priority is around their health of that individual. And clearly, if there's a medical condition, they clearly quite rightly need to focus on that. Now, again, I had lots of conversations as part of Operation Leicester with the NHS providers saying, who's the best person or persons to get that sample? Because the reality is, and again, even if it's after 24 hours, there is still opportunity to identify what may have been used, but 24 hours is a clear window of opportunity. Any of the forensic experts will tell you, if you can get it within 24 hours, you've got the best chance of identifying what may have been used or not used, as the case may be on occasions. So the agreement we had with the hospitals, bearing in mind we take samples in hospitals, in other clinical settings for a variety of things, whether it be through road traffic collisions, whether it be through to sexual offences. And the reality is we have a system in each police force where there's a medical expert, which is usually a doctor, that is on call, that can go and get that sample from the hospital, particularly blood. But the reality is also, if it's a urine sample, and whilst obviously the officer won't be present when the person gives that sample, but the reality is the officer will then be in a position to take that sample from that person. So they can produce the relevant containers where the sample can be, a urine sample can be passed into, and they can take it away, and therefore through the forensics systems that we've got to secure best evidence, we can do it. So the reality is an officer can get the sample from the person, an officer can do that, but if it's blood, it'd have to be a medical expert, which ultimately would be a doctor in most cases within police forces on an on-call arrangement. The important bit is, it goes back to, we need to get it, and I accept, and again, you've given examples there where there's some confusion across the country what's the best way to do it. The work that we need to continue to do with police forces is make sure there is consistency in how they do it. And I know Operation Leicester concluded because thankfully the numbers of reporting went down, but with the caution of there will still be offences being committed not reported. So it's the police service is not complacent thinking, oh, that's it sorted. But importantly, the work that continues through, and again, it's not just about violence against women and girls, but the work that the Deputy Chief Constable Maggie Bly is doing through the violence against women and girls, and looking at policy around spiking and practice around spiking with the College of Policing, that all brings that into play as well to get that consistency.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really needs to be, looked at. And it's such a difficult one because, the police have only got so much time. They've only got so many resources, the same as the NHS, the same as, and we do have to speak. So many people say to me, you've got to be careful about victim blaming. Now, victim blaming isn't something that I do, but what I do say and what I do believe is that we all have our own personal responsibility for safeguarding ourselves as well. So that's something that should come into force. And I think with making education on spiking a lot more, making people a lot more aware so that they know personally what they have to do might be a good start. How do you feel about that?
Don't I agree? So again, it can't just be down to, as you say, victim blaming. It's not this, is it? The reality is someone's been a victim because of someone other's behaviour. So it's about, we need to focus more on those that's committing the offence. And I think that was recognised over the last 18 months. There's been an increased focus saying is, okay, whilst we need to work with all communities and all representation for communities to increase awareness, increase education, to take simple steps to safeguard all of us when we're out and about doing whatever we're doing on the nighttime economy or day-to-day business. But the reality is these offences would not be being committed if it wasn't for individuals committing the offence. So we need to continue to work really hard to identify those responsible. And part of education is working with individuals saying is, look, that behaviour is not acceptable. If you're doing it because you think it's a joke to see the impact on an individual, you need to understand it's not a joke. It can have a massive impact on that person's life, not just in that next 24, 48 hours, but for the rest of their life in terms of their own confidence, their willingness to go out about, and again, I use the nighttime economy, but any environment where they've previously been in, where they've been spiked. But just importantly, we've got to recognise that it will be down to some responsibility of venues and communities, areas where individuals are being spiked. So what can they do more to, firstly, try and make it a very difficult, hostile environment for people to commit the offence in the first place? So again, good CCTV, good searching regimes if people going into venues, all the bit around actually utilising, as you know very well, the caps on the drinks to stop people being able to be put stuff in the drink in the first place, but just importantly recognizing again there's lots of eyes and ears that's in those venues or other parts of communities that can identify individuals that are thinking that person looks a bit suspicious, their behavior is not what we'd normally expect, and then being willing to challenge that individual, and ultimately if they do see him doing something suspiciously, making sure they report it, and again report it to the police or report it through the security industry to make sure we get that information and hopefully identify that person as well.
Yeah. And when we're talking about victims, even with the, people say, oh, we're only doing it for a laugh, it was only a prank. Now, for those people that say that they're only doing this sort of crime as a prank, if you could see some of the messes that people end up in, I'm sure they wouldn't think it was a prank at all. I mean, that person, some typical signs, you'd probably wet yourself. Those drugs just want to get out of your system. So you've probably been violently sick. You're shaking, your eyes are all blurry, you're going in and out of consciousness. I can't really see any prank going on with that at all. So I can't see that anybody could use that as a reason why that they were spiking somebody. I've had a friend of mine who's a landlord. He's 6'2", and he went out with a group of friends recently, and one of his friends spiked his drink, and walking home he wet himself, he was ill, and now that's taken his confidence away. He doesn't, he'll go to his local pub now, but he won't go out in town, won't go out with the rugby boys, won't. And that's just dreadful. When I hear reports like that coming back to me, I think you've just ruined someone's life, their lifestyle. Yeah. And it's
And that's the point, Dawn, isn't it? This changes people's lives, those that are victims, and it's never for the better. It's, if anything, and again, I've heard the stories and spoken to some victims of spiking where ultimately they won't go back out in the nighttime economy. They don't have the confidence to go back out. They lose confidence in terms of general day-to-day working, let alone just going out into special occasions as well. So people need to understand here, this has a massive impact on that individual, not just that individual, but that individual's family and friends and other communities. And again, for the fact of what someone sees as a prank, which clearly it's not, the reality is this changes people's lives for a negative, and people need to understand that. And they need to understand, even if they think it's a prank, the reality is they can go to prison. The reality is that there is sentencing opportunity to send someone to prison if they are doing that, and they need to stop it.
Now that leads me nicely on to my biggest bugbear, which I'd like to bring up right now, is the sentencing and how spiking is recognised as a crime within its own right. Now, I've had many discussions, probably I'd say a couple of arguments with a few people over the last few years. And in fact, I was talking to a barrister recently who swore down that that there's already enough sentencing laws that can take in this. And for the people who don't know out there, I'll quote a couple I know, Jason, but you probably know a lot more. So I'm going to look at the 1861 Act, Offence Against the Persons Act. I'm also going to look at the poisoning with obnoxious substance. Is there any more you could add to that list?
So the reality is, again, the first thing with spiking, it's traditionally been used as a means to commit a further offence, Dawn, hasn't it? So as you know very well, unfortunately, we see victims of sexual offences, victims of robbery and everything else, where ultimately spiking has been the first offence to commit the second offence. And as you know very well, ultimately the focus from a police investigation and then recording focuses very much on the final offence, the sexual offences or robbery. Well, that's the first part for me. The fact is there's a spiking offence should be an aggravated part of committing that other offence, and that is not recognised at the minute in terms of legislation. The other part for me goes back to, and we've touched on it already through this podcast, is that actually the impact on the victim, even if they're not a victim of a second offence, the fact is they've been spiked has a massive impact on their life. And because of the nature of the offence, the fact is that actually, I know there may be other offences, but it's not very clear. It's not clear for officers that's going about their daily business dealing with lots of other offences as well. The fact is you're putting spiking as a dedicated offence. Firstly, for me, makes it very clear to those that are victims, we take it very seriously. The second bit for those committing the offences shows the importance of why we're taking it seriously, because it's a defined offence in itself. And the third part then is it should be an aggravating offence. If they're going to commit a further offence, it should be an aggravating offence for that secondary offence that goes on. And the reality is, even though courts will argue, yes, we can put some aggravating factor in terms of the second offence because of the spiking, it's not used as it should be. And for me, this needs to be taken seriously. It impacts on far too many people that probably don't have a lot of confidence in coming forward to report it in the first place because of all the issues we've touched on earlier on. And we need to show we take it seriously. We take it seriously and we makes it easier for police services to recognise those series of crimes that maybe are taking around spiking, not different types of offences, but one defined offence. And the third part, then, it makes it easier for courts to hopefully make sure those individuals that are caught, particularly if they do commit a further offence linked to that spiking, that actually it's recognised in terms of the sentencing to that individual as well.
Brilliant. And so when we were just talking about that, then you just lighted a few things in my mind. This weekend I popped out down to Exmouth. It's a lovely little seaside town because the sun was shining for a change, Jason. It was lovely. So
I thought it always shone down there, to be fair. I thought the sun always shone down in the southwest.
Well, yeah, it does a lot more than around the rest of the UK. I'll add, thank goodness. But so I bumped into a guy who I used to drink in my local pub, and he said, Dawn, and he's got this son who was just about to go into the military, and he's a tall lad, good looking, quite confident. And he said to me, oh my God, Dawn, I've seen what you've been doing all over social media, and I just want to thank you. And he told me about his son getting spiked at work, and they later found out he was spiked with amphetamines. And do you know what? This guy is, all of his family are just dead against any sort of drugs, and they spiked him. And from this guy who's normally really happy-go-lucky, good-looking chap, always, a bit chopsy, and he had to give up his flat. It ruined his relationship. The girlfriend thought that he was a drug addict because his pupils were so enlarged, and and he was anxious, and they've just said to me that it took him months and months to get back to his normal self. He had to come home and live with his mum and dad, and he actually went back. That they said to him, you don't go back to that job. So he never went back, but he bumped into one of the guys at work, and he admitted to him that he'd spiked him with amphetamines. And he said, why would you do that to me? You just ruined my life. And he said, well, everybody else at work was doing it, and we thought it'd be a laugh to do it to you. Now, this guy is now making different life choices, Jason. This isn't just oh my God, he was feeling a little bit down for a couple of days. This has actually changed his whole life choices. Now he's not going to go into the military as he originally was. Yeah. He left that work. He split up from his relationship, all for someone saying, oh, it was just a prank.
As I said, Dawn, it destroys lives. That's the reality of it, and that's why we've got to do everything we can to make sure we are stamping out spiking, which is your brand. The reality is, it can't be done on their own. We've got to make sure that everybody's taking responsibility across the country, realistically, and the more and more publicity we can get around this, not to cause more alarm and distress for those that's already been a victim, but the review is to try and stop future victims as well. And then that's got to be the cause and the fight that we've got to do. But at the same time, we've got to make sure we're doing everything we can to identify those responsible, because at the minute, not enough people are being caught. We know they're not, but somebody must know who's doing this. I'm not being funny. People know who's doing this.
Of course they do.
And we've got to, again, give people confidence to come forward and do it, to give that information to the relevant services to make sure they receive the necessary punishment for all the impact and destroying of somebody else's life.
So I don't know if you saw a couple of years ago, there was a nightclub in Bristol, and there was a guy going up, and he said to this girl, oh, let's have a picture together. And they put their arms around her, and one of them went dink and dropped something into a drink. Now, it was when they were watching the video back, and they were like, oh, so she stopped from drinking it. And this video went viral, and it was just showing how spiking is done by distraction, really, which we believe should be shared a lot more. So we've been trying to speak to victims, like whoever contacts me, if they contact us on social media, whichever way. I always have time to speak to victims of this crime. And that's partially to make sure, obviously, number one, that they're okay and that I can explain to them what different avenues they've got on which way they want to go forward with the crime. But the other part as well is for me to try and understand how it's happened to them. And, you know, this isn't just happening in nightclubs and pubs, as we assume. This is happening at football matches, rugby matches. We've had a wedding, a funeral. It's like, you know, this is happening to anyone at any place at any time. So I think for us, how we try and go forward to the victims and how I can use all of this information is vitally important to, we hope, to the police, we hope to the emergency services, the ambulance. And so on that note, what information or sharing do you think we should be looking at doing?
So again, importantly, as much information as we possibly can needs to be shared, Dawn, with as many people. And again, that's not about breaking confidentiality of victims, because clearly we want to protect victims. So it has to be with their consent, we know that. But the reality is, in terms of ways people are committing this offence, locations where they're committing this offence, those that's committing this offence, the sooner we get that information to the relevant services. And when I say services, that's not just police. That can involve, again, security industry, it can involve retail outlets, it can involve lots of different people, as you say, because it's not just occurring in the nighttime economy. It doesn't. The important bit is we've got to get that information into the system very quickly. And for me, it boils back down to local relationships, local partnerships that already exist to keep our towns and cities and local communities safe. And by doing that, again, you don't just build up trust and confidence in sharing that information, but you see some action from it. And ultimately what you do is you keep that community safer by taking that action against those that action needs to be taken against. So the piece for me is, look, any information needs to go into the system. We need to get into the system quickly, because reality, it might not mean anything there and then, but actually 2 weeks later, when we have similar reports or similar information with a little bit more information on it, it all starts to build that picture up, doesn't it?
It does.
Of what's actually happening or not happening in a certain area, and importantly, what then, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be through some preventative work that can be done through premises or etc., that can be done again to stop future victims in the occurring again.
So when we done a report, this is back in 2021, this is before the needle spiking happened and the girls' night in.
Yeah.
And we actually realized then that spiking is such a hugely underreported crime. Over 97% of victims didn't report this crime to the police. Now, I know you don't have the answer for this, but I just wanted to ask you the question anyway. Do you have any reason to believe why that's the case?
I think there's a variety of reasons, Dawn. For some will be lack of trust in the police service. So I'm not naive. I've been in the police service for 30 years. Again, unfortunately, some people will, no matter what, will report. So I think the second bit is, we touched on some embarrassment factor from the individual. Again, they may have been taking other things at the night, wherever they've been at that time, and therefore they don't want to be embarrassed by it. I think the third one is they may have been doing things that actually in itself could be illegal, and therefore they think they're going to get themselves into trouble by reporting it when they've been a victim, which again, hopefully I've given you that assurance that's not what the police service is here to do. The fourth bit is ultimately, again, they may not believe they've been a victim. And again, unfortunately, I see far too many of that, where they're thinking, oh, it couldn't have happened. I'm dreaming it. I've had too much to drink, or I've been using other things, and then actually I can't have been a victim in the first place. So I think there's a variety of reasons. The reality goes back to, though, we do need people to have confidence in coming forward. And even if you haven't got confidence reporting it to the police, then please, please, please report it to, whether it be victim support, other charities, including yourselves, Dawn, all the work that you're doing. Get it reported, because you might not want your details to be shared, and you want to protect some of your friends and family that may have been out with you at the time. But by just getting some basic information into the system, it helps us build up that picture of what actually is happening in locations, and therefore again gives us best opportunity to again stop people being a victim in the future, but all at the same time hopefully catch those that's responsible. But I recognise, and again, it's not just spiking, is it? We know for a fact there's lots of significant underreporting for a variety of offences. The reality is the police service needs that information, even if it comes through third party, to help us do everything we can to stop people being a victim in the future.
And that's something that every time I speak to any victim, it's one of the first questions I always ask them. Have you reported this to the police? No. Why is that? We don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
Why
And
is why
yeah,
not? Because this
yeah,
could stop other people in the future. It's not just about
yeah.
yourself, is what I'd love to stress.
And the thing with it is, Dawn, and ultimately, if they know they don't want to report to the police to with a view to going to court, I know that's another reason. Some things, look, I don't want to go to court for this. And as a even if they're a victim, they don't want to give evidence. You can still report to the police, and you don't have to go to court. Now, again, there's always could be grounds where actually, depending on the serious nature of the offence, then actually it may be a need that we do need that person to go to court and give evidence. But the reality is that'll be taken into account as we go through the investigation. And it goes back to, look, ultimately we want a victim to have the confidence and the courage to come forward and then get the support that hopefully does give them the courage and the confidence to give evidence if we need to give evidence. But if they don't want to do that, they don't have to. We can't physically force somebody to give evidence. We can't. It doesn't work like that in policing. Again, yes, a court can ask somebody to go to court and they can give orders to go to court. But the reality is it would never have got to court if someone's saying it's, I don't want it to go to court because of all these issues that's taking place. So I think the important bit for me is, look, if you believe you're a victim, and you may not be certain, because as I said before, some things happen to people when they're out and about and they can't remember. But if you believe you've been a victim, it needs reporting. And if you can't if you haven't got the confidence and the trust in police to report it in the first instance, there is other parties, other organisations you can report it to. So please report it. By doing so, you're playing your part to hopefully not just make sure you get the necessary support, but secondly, making sure that actually we could be stopping a future victim as well.
Now, that is the most perfect advice that can be shared for me today on this podcast. It really is. And I'd just like to ask about the police codes. It's something that I don't particularly understand that much. And when I was trying to explain it in Westminster, I'm sure I didn't come across as, it must have been a bit of a, because I was trying to say we need it to be a specific offence code, which is, and then when I was trying to delve deeper, I was confusing myself when I was giving the answer, to be honest with you. And I've seen some MPs look at me like, oh my God, can she explain this in a better way? But so currently, if I was a victim of spiking and I got raped, then the rape charge would stand, as what I understand, and the spiking charge wouldn't really show. So when we went to all the police forces, like 3 or 4 years ago, we went to every police force across the country to request their freedom of information data. And this is what really got me to start this petition in the first place, because it was virtually impossible. I couldn't get to the bottom of it. I had to ask about spiking with alcohol, sexual assault through obnoxious substance. And it was just, the list was endless. And the man hours it would have taken by one police force basically said to me, Dawn, it's impossible. So I was thankful of that, because then it stopped me carrying on, like going on and on at them to try and get this, to get this recordable data. And something that we're fighting passionately for is for clear guidance, zero tolerance, including alcohol, because that is the main spiking ingredient, as we found out. So how do we look at this with this coding? Could we just ask you that?
So you've touched on it. So your confusion would be mirrored in some of the police service as well, Dawn. So you're not on your own there. And again, that could be, someone say that's embarrassing for an ex-chief officer to say that actually they don't understand the codes. The reality is spiking in the variety of forms you've touched on there, because it could come in different ways, could be recorded under a different type of offence, different types of offences, which straight away creates an issue about inconsistency, doesn't it? So straight away, if you don't know where it's being recorded, how do you then make sure you're joining up a type of offence here that's recorded under one type of offence to another offence that's recorded under another offence here, to say actually it could be the same offender committing both? So the reality goes back to, for me, it goes about how do we simplify it to make it easier for the officers that responding to case of spiking. And if there's one offence, it makes it a lot easier. The second bit, then, it shows the importance, because I think that's really important for victim. Look, this is important. It's not just under some offence from 1800s. It's actually some current offence here that actually we show it's important. And I think the third part goes back to, it shows the importance to an offender. Look, we're taking this very seriously. So if you do get caught committing the offence of spiking, this is what's likely to happen to you, not this other offences that could be somewhat from 1800s to this other offence from many years ago as well. Actually, it's this offence. And I think the fourth bit then, it makes it clearer for the courts that it should be an aggravating, that should still be taken into account. The person should still be charged with that offence of spiking if they commit a further associated offence because of the spiking. Because reality is, it's an aggravating factor. The person has committed that offence, that secondary offence, by the use of spiking to commit that offence. Now, thankfully, recently we've not seen the ones that have been reported, they've not gone on to necessarily commit secondary offences, but we still see lots of secondary offences being reported, and therefore why should that person just be dealt with for that second offence when actually it's just as serious the first offence, i.e. the spiking offence in itself. So I think the piece for me goes back to what we've got to do in terms of trying to get to it so it's simplified for not just the police service but for victims and wider communities, is showing the impact of the current legislation and how difficult it makes it for recording, joining up the dots in terms of likely linked offences, all the way through to a victim not having confidence in coming forward because actually they don't see it seen as important because actually it's not got its own offence. We've got to build the evidence to show why that needs to be the case, and I think it is. I think that there is a move towards it. The fact is, we're having the conversation about it shows people are recognising there's a need to consider it. What we've got to do, though, it goes back to, we do need people to report it. There is an offence at the minute, so give an individual confidence that's listening to this podcast. If someone is a victim of spiking, they don't need to worry about what offence it is. They just need to report it and let the police service make sure it's recorded. What we then need to show is, as more people report it, we can start to show how more difficult we're making it by not having its own offence within the police service, and therefore gives it more weight to continue the argument with government that it needs its own defined offence. But in the meantime, going back to what I've said hopefully many times on the podcast, is we need people to report it. Let the police service make sure it's recording the relevant offences, but importantly for you, it is an offence to spike, and therefore we need you to report it because we want to catch those responsible.
Boom. And I think that's a perfect way to end our podcast today. Jason Harwin, thank you so much. Firstly, for joining on our board. Secondly, for giving us the insight today on matters of the law. And for anybody listening today, our advice is, if you have been a victim of this dreadful crime, whether it's through drink, whether it's through a vape, whether it's through food, there are many different ways that spiking is taking place currently across the UK and even on a global level. So please always report this crime to the police, even if it's historic. We need to know from you so that we can start gaining that all-important data so we can make a change. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks,
and
Dawn.
I should look forward to speaking to you again on another podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.